is author of the book called The Scholar, and his new book called Entering the Maze is coming out this June, and it's an English translation of a Bengali queer fiction written by Krishna Gopal Pandit. He's also taken the conversation forward on queer community through his Facebook page, uh, New Gender Studies, and also through his YouTube page. So, welcome, sir. Followed by this, the second speaker will be joining us online. They are Rumi Harish. Rumi Harish is a musician, amateur painter, poet, human rights activist, and a social justice warrior. They have directed music for Kannada feature film Kaudi and several other documentaries. Rumi is also working towards producing artistic material to bring out issues on social assistance in public and identifies as a queer transgender person. Welcome, Rumi. Thank you for joining us. The next panelist is Harish Subramanian. Harish Subramanian works with an arts and culture organization as a program coordinator. He has his skills in photography, writing, editing, stagecraft, ideation, event, festival ideation, and management. We're so glad to have you here, Harish. Could you come? The moderator for this panel discussion is Garima. Rumi, could you please switch on the video?
It could be a poor connection. So sometimes the signal is poor.
Thank you for joining us here. So I will jump right into the questions. So first question I have is because we are the panelists titled Queer Arts in Indian Context. So what is queer art, or more specifically, what is Indian queer art? Like, how do you understand or perceive Indian queer art?
Okay, no, it is a rather interesting question. I think the way in which I imagine queer art is when art is somehow trying to challenge a very, very widely visible heteronormativity that one can see in the art. So therefore, every time I go to an exhibition, for example, and I'm talking primarily about visual arts, but it can apply to other arts as well. Every time I go to an exhibition, I find that there seems to be an assumption that heterosexuality would be the only kind of sexuality that would be represented. So therefore, if you're talking about erotic love, men, women, yes? And I think that assumption, and also the way in which we configure heterosexuality is very strange, isn't it? Because we say that it is heterosexuality, but it is only the female body that is sexualized. The male body is not. So therefore, every time you go to an exhibition, you're assaulted by naked breasts. They jump at you from everywhere. Not too many penises inside. So therefore, there is a certain way in which the male body seems to have evaded a kind of sexualized, eroticized representation, which the women's bodies are constantly being subjected. So therefore, and the reason why this is happening is because predominantly the art is being produced by heteronormative heterosexual cis men, which is why they are trying to impose their visual imagination onto the rest of the society. So any art that challenges that is queer art.
Hi. Hi, Rumi. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. So, can I undo that?
Oh, yeah.
Early in my life, I actually learned, I was very much basically trained in construction units for almost 20 years. And now I'm exploring painting on my own. The three things that stand very prominently for me to identify something with who I craft art is that it challenges the framing system, which is very patriarchal way, and the way the even patriarchal way the art system within India also engage with a kind of feminist behavior. So here art on the other hand, to the ground and on the other hand, challenges this kind of living system where you are allowed to a more democratic understanding of the art, where you approach art with more endearment rather than fear. And I have often felt, actually I'm not experiencing a lot of freedom in imagination, freedom in expression. I allow myself to feel something, even if it goes wrong, but something like classical music, like Indian classical music, something like me, that is not just intellectuality or intellectuality, it also comes from a lot of values of patriarchy, a very melodramatic devotion, and extremely realistic patterns of, the parampara and the tradition, where it is challenged that you are seen in the and that I think happened in my life. The moment I challenged those systems, I was thrown out of the conscious circles, even when I was sleeping, singing. I mean, now I become saying because I'm going through this transition and I'm like trying to settle with my new world. But even when I was singing as a woman, when I challenged all these things, people like used to, like engage with me through existing concepts. They instead would keep asking me only one thing. Also, you practice it. So one person needs to practice his guide, but minimum necessary speak because what is the challenge? I think that this people have to short and then maybe talk later.
For me, queer art is something that is going to challenge, I think, the notion of art itself, because everybody who's an artist or an art practitioner has a rigid idea of what is the kind of art they're producing. And right, both rightly said, what are the questions that is going to be queer for them, which is in common society that some of the art is also. So queer art for me is predominantly something that just makes you question what you do. And also the kind of stories I get through, whatever form of art I'm consuming. What does it actually say? Whose stories are these? And a lot of times the queer arts have been, it is not visibly, it is predominantly visibly or on the shallow level it is queer because it is predominantly made by heterosexual or cis men. Uh, that is also because a lot of trans and queer artists don't really get a platform to display or to perform to showcase their art itself. So I think the idea of what it conveys, what it stands for, because that is going to be the bigger question. Because we recall the history, we recall the lives and the story of the country and whatever it is, people through the art they produce, through the writing they produce, through all of these things. So it becomes a measure of what was allowed. And in that way, whatever challenges that notion, whatever gets through all that is with art.
So this makes me think that there is this undercurrent of tension between mainstream art and queer art, right? So so originally I was going to ask how can we bring queer arts to the mainstream, but now I think the question that comes to my mind is: do we need to bring queer arts to the mainstream? Like that tension between the aesthetic, the mainstream and queer aesthetic. How do we negotiate that?
We definitely need to mainstream queer art. But then what is mainstream if it is not heteronormative, cinema-based, Bollywood-based art? So in that way, like I said, there are plenty of queer artists, especially in India and Indian context, who are trying to do, their original work. But the idea of what you mentioned, the undercurrent of mainstream and queer art, there is no queer art in India yet. It becomes if you make a queer movie, it becomes an indie movie, and you have to be with certain background in order for your movie to be taken seriously to even get this. Otherwise, you just become a quote unquote nobody who just made another movie. The same goes for every kind of how many queer artists do actually do, even visual arts performing arts. There is not many avenues. And even if you are a queer artist who is recognized by the mainstream art world, you are not allowed to perform your art. You have to still stick to the rules of what it was. Like for example, if you're performing a classical dance or classical music, you have to stick to that, perform that, and you can be a queer artist who's performing that. But you are not allowed to bring in your own version, your own story to it. So we have to negotiate it in some way. And we also, I think that is also another major, purpose of queer art. I think to question the mainstream things and to actually guide through the mainstream of things, because whatever we think of mainstream masculinity or femininity these days is not actually from the thing. It is always pushed to the boundaries by queer people or for queer concept. Take the Tom of Finland idea of or like even drag queens or whatever it is. The ideas have always pushed it towards the edge of it, and most predominantly by the queer artists themselves. So, which becomes the norm much later, right? Now everybody thinks like being this leather wearing hats and chains and whatnot is kind of masculine, which was created by this whole hyper masculinity was created by Tom of Finland, and even the drag things. Now everybody's that also questions in a lot of way, what it is to be a male. If you are hyper masculine, and even to trans women who actually face a lot of trouble for this, is that how feminine are you? That you have to be overtly feminine. You have to be, you have to be quote and unquote to the heteronormative society. You are more beautiful than a natural worker. Like, what does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. But that is the kind of things they expect, because they see a lot of this, like overtly feminine, image of. So I think we have to find the negotiation of this is what it is, and everybody's allowed to exist in their own way. I think that way we can make that into a mainstream, if mainstream ever exists.
Okay. So a couple of names that I would want to mention, I think, which is very important. So I remember during our early conversations, Rumi and I suggested. So Rumi showed me. Rumi is talking about his music today, but Rumi is also doing a bit of painting on the side. So Rumi sent me some of his work, and then I immediately decided that there were a lot of similarities between what Rumi is doing and what somebody called Bhupen Thakkar has done. So therefore, those of you who are not aware of Bhupen Thakkar, please look him up, because he's perhaps one of the greatest queer artists that India has produced. He died about 20 years ago, but the National Gallery of Modern Art in GMA in Delhi had an enormous retrospective of Bhupen Thakkar's work. Bhupen Thakkar is one of the first people who was producing homoerotic imagery way back in the late 70s, early 80s. But Bhupen Thakkar is standing there in splendid isolation. There aren't too many artists who have joined his league. However, there are photographers. I would want to mention Vasso X Vasso. You may want to look him up as well. He does very interesting photography work. And there are queer artists who are graduating from various art colleges. They are also, as you very rightly said, they are trying to get their exhibitions in the politics of exhibition. So there are some galleries that are willing to show queer art. Then there are other galleries who are going to be like, no, thank you, but I don't think we can handle this. So Kolkata tends to be a slightly more liberal space. So a lot of queer art is visible there. So yes, I would say that there is a certain kind of queer art culture that is uh, in a process of gestation. I think it's blossoming. But hey, give it time. Yeah.
Rumi?
Yeah, I just go back to my question and then this question. I feel in music from a lot of where cases that are really especially usually still living on the studios and other forms. And I was really very unlike the cinematic music, there is lots of space for your thinking. And there was also the space to make it good, or you could present it because it's so abstract. You could be yourself with the classical music. That's the thing that I was always feeling when I was singing. Now coming to painting and what I've been doing in painting, I first thought that was abstract because a little bit easy, but then I don't know. Eventually, I ended up doing a lot of creative, paintings, and for me, what mattered, my initial fascination that mattered on canvas, one is the sound, the crush on canvas. The second thing was that deers. My fascination with deers. So I went imagining different kinds of deers, and I realized that I didn't have to be answerable to any teachers or any training systems where I have to explain. And if I want to, even if it means follow a canvas, that's okay. But that's where I think I've picked up, trying to explore myself, express myself. And I feel, I don't think, there is a very stark difference in the mainstream art and queer art. I feel the more important is how you wear and how you live the good politics through the art that you practice. So when I was like struggling, what? So when I was struggling to kind of put that through music, the painting opened up doors, like, painting just the colors, the sketching, the canvas, the touch, the feel, everything came through, and so I felt I could express myself more easily. And I think we should stop giving that much of power for all this. Supposed to be mainstream because we are not in any fringes. I mean, if people recognize or not, that's their business. They reject, they can't understand. And enough of thinking that you're always on the fringes. And I'm like, really, I'm very angry with all these mainstream things because I've been boycotted by people. Now, what I do is, I boycott them. I don't care anymore. I cannot tolerate them anymore. So I just don't believe in mainstream anymore. Sorry if I'm rude.
Yeah, so you brought a very interesting point, Rumi, especially in the terms that you mentioned that you started painting quite recently. And when we were speaking previously, you did mention a few times that you consider yourself a little bit of an amateur artist yet. So how do you kind of envision the role of, say, amateur art kind of fostering in queer arts? Because queer arts is, in an Indian context, it's still very much an emerging field. So how do you kind of envision that role?
See, I think the biggest issue with Indian arts in any nature, whether mainstream, non-mainstream, traditional, modern, contemporary, anything, anywhere, there are two things, sorry, that is constructed by the society and which is strictly followed. One is the training systems, where they say, oh, you're well trained. Second is the aesthetics, which is built on a certain understanding of the mainstream social morality. Now, when you try and break that, whether you're queer or not, eventually I push you to be queer. Now, for me, the thing is, I had to break several such obstacles when I was singing. One second, I think I lost your question. Can you just repeat the question again?
I wanted to ask, how do you see amateur art playing a role in queer art as you know?
Okay. So that's what the things that go in the name of training, the things that go in the name of aesthetics. Like recently, one of my friends, so basically what has happened now is that because of my transition issues and my traumatic COVID times, I'm not able to go out. So I kind of put myself through painting, writing poetry and all that. Suddenly, there are people who respond with saying, oh, you started writing poetry. Oh, good. But it's very, that doesn't have, and that aesthetically it's not appealing. And I'm like, but I didn't write it to get oh great, this is great, this is good type of thing. That response. The second thing is painting. One person absolutely told me, I actually don't like your painting, I like your music the best. But I thought I was like struggling, I was almost committing suicide when I was painting. Because I could never express myself. Either because of the dress code that the music system demands, or because of the voice production that it demands, or because of the training that it demands. I had to like subscribe to the this heteronormative, patriarchal, Brahminical, etc. All these things I had to subscribe. Now, when I'm able to explore something without all these things, they bring back the same idea of aesthetics to understand my art. I'm like, don't do it at all. Don't see my painting, don't hear my poetry. Also, don't listen to my music anymore because I'm not going to sing the same thing which I used to sing. So I think it is more of a Protestant struggle. I think the way, the process in which jazz started, the process in which a lot of music which started as a rebel, I think we engage at that level. But going one step further, the creativity is, I think we're also looking at images which is, and we also have to train ourselves to think, our imagery has to be different and, not get stuck. How much ever clear we claim, sometimes we get stuck in the so-called mainstream. So even that we need to unlearn and try and like for example, somebody said, "Oh, your paintings are too colorful." I was confused, thinking, should I not use colors? What is wrong with people? I mean, paint, ink, and color and use. Then I probably understood it in this way that maybe I use too many range of colors. I don't know. I mean, like, I love colors. Yeah, that's how I do it. I think it is just, the whole thing, amateur, I use the word amateur in my intro because I don't want somebody tomorrow kicks me saying what painting have you done. So I just use that until again, because we all come from that kind of a background where we have to call ourselves amateur, because I can't be master of anything, especially when I'm queer.
So
I actually had the same question for you because you did mention Bhupen Thakur before, right?
yes.
And I was reading up a bit on Bhupen Thakur and I found this very interesting word in this context. Like he was a self-taught artist.
Correct.
So could you
Correct.
also?
Correct, absolutely. Well, I could happily talk about Rumi Harish that I will some more. He's one of my absolute favorite artists. Rumi Harish trained as an accountant. So he trained as an accountant. And again, he took to painting much later on in life because he didn't find accountants interesting. Why? Accountants is the world's most interesting thing. Something was clearly wrong with Rumi Harish. Anyway, so he decided accountancy wasn't his thing. Well, he's lost. But he took up painting, and then initially, again, a lot of people had trouble with it because, again, he was not properly trained, he didn't go to art school. But I think this is also the thing about art, is that if you manage to somehow create a language of your own, sooner or later, the establishment will be forced to take notice. You cannot be ignored for too long. So what Bhupen Thakur managed to do, and I think this is his genius, is that he discovered a certain language, and which was uniquely his own. So clearly that was fine. Also, I will have to pretty shamelessly plug my book because my publisher wants me to do that. I'm so sorry. But so the person that I translated, Krishna Gopal Molli, again, he did not come to literature after getting any literary training. His job was a sub-editor for a Kolkata English newspaper called The Statesman. So he was sub-editing for The Statesman, and then he set up his own publishing house at his home. He was publisher. He was a sub-editor. He comes to literature much later on in life. And by the way, this is something that I think Rumi would be very interested to hear, is that for a long time, his literature was not taken very seriously either, because again, he did not receive any training. Well, now he's being translated and he's being published by a major publisher, so skip that. Yeah.
So, you mentioned about establishment taking notice if you keep at it for long enough. So, in a similar context, I wanted to ask that since all three of you are connected to poetry, so poetry generally has a certain role to play in justice movements. So, I wanted to ask, how does poetry figure in, say, gender justice movement? Like, how do you kind of, how is your understanding of poetry in this space?
So, shall I? I read this remark many years ago when in American academia, in Indian academia we came to a little later, but in American academia they were beginning to offer courses in queer literature. This is happening sometime in the, well, actually it begins to happen in the 70s, but towards the 90s it really becomes a thing. And somebody had said very interestingly, he said, well, I was trying to design a course of queer American literature. And while I was designing that course, I found American literature is queer literature. And then he says, well, I mean, look at the American writers. Look at Walt Whitman, gay. Emily Dickinson, lesbian. All the big figures that you have, Allen Ginsberg, gay. So therefore, if you look around in American literature, all the big figures, I can't think of too many. You can count the straight people in American literature on your little finger. So therefore, queer people are everywhere. LGBT people are everywhere. It is another conspiracy of silence that people like us, horrible patriarchal people like me, when we teach Walt Whitman, we very quietly don't talk about his sexuality. Yes? So even when he's talking about, falling in love with another man, oh, my dear students, please understand, we are just good friends. No, sir, but he's talking about lying down with him and is, yes, they're good friends. And so, if I say, repeat a lie of another, and that becomes the truth. So therefore, we teachers, horrible people we are constantly going to ram down heteronormativity down your throats until you choke. But then there will be these other teachers who will be, excuse me, you just attended Dr. Chatterjee's classes. Well, he talked everything about how beautiful Walt Whitman's poetry is. He did not mention the fact that Walt Whitman has a boyfriend. Did he? No, sir, let me tell you. So there will be these other teachers who are going to take the conversation forward. I think speaking at an academic institution, teachers have a huge role to play. And that needs to be done. So therefore, I think that poetry has, from its roots, been queer. And when I say roots, I literally mean roots. If you look at Greek poetry, one of the earliest lesbians that I can think of was lesbian Sappho. I mean, look, they're all that. So therefore, I think that queer literature, queer poetry, to use my favorite phrase, is hiding in plain sight. It's right there. It's just that due to a conspiracy of silence that has been manufactured by heteronormative academia, we are not paying attention to it. So this is where students have a role to play, and the teachers, please, get on with it.
Rumi, you had mentioned that you also started writing poetry recently, so perhaps.
I'm sorry, I was writing poetry earlier also, even before I knew whether I was queer art. But the thing is that then also it didn't feel like poetry to me only. I kind of realized that I cannot write anything beyond my body and myself when I want to express myself, and only then for me it is queer poetry. I mean, when I don't put myself under the fire to challenge myself, it's very easy to. I mean, this is exactly what I faced in music for me, whether it's poetry, music, or painting, or talking, or anything. Like unless you challenge yourself, put yourself under the fire to question, continuously check yourself. Like I had this experience. I have a friend called Sunil, and initially when I met him, I boasted about being a good musician and all that. And one day he was singing loudly when I was riding my bike. He was my PA. And when I screamed at him saying, "Oh my God, I can't take this bass kind of singing," and he threw shit on my face by saying, "Who the hell are you? You guys say what is stool and what is bass stool? How can you decide just because you're trained? It is my expression and my limit. Don't listen if you don't want to listen." And that's exactly, I sat and cried for years when that happened and felt extremely guilty of coming from that, the ivory tower of being classical musicians. And that started breaking inside me, and that's when I realized that unless we put ourselves to that criticism, to check ourselves, what we are talking about and express, I don't. So query by itself is also a self-criticism space. So I think in that context is what I see music, painting, poetry, whatever kind of expression. Like I recently wrote it's not a play, it is just like a different kind of rendition that I tried, where I've written the journey of my voice and the journey that I traveled in music, which was full of bullshit experiences where, I was forced to wear saris for concerts and my saris dropped off while I was singing, all kinds of things. So I've had very dis what do you say, dysphoric journey in music, and that actually pushed me to thinking then how will I express my poetry, how will I express my painting. So for me, I think it is more about it's more very clearly more about putting yourself on the fire. Put it to check yourself. That's all.
There is this collection of poetry, The World That Belongs to Us, which was released in 2021, I think. Atik Achal and Aditya Davis, the writer of this. So this has a collection of poets who are all from Southeast Asia, and they're all queer. And if you have a chance, please go through that. The kind of themes, the kind of things they're talking about, the kind of stories that comes out. If it was a standalone poem, it doesn't really give you a queer idea. And then you put all of it together, it becomes this very powerful thing, which is that I was quite surprised that this many queer poets, and there are names which I haven't even even was aware of from South India, from Chennai, from Kerala. There are like multiple names which I did not even know existed, and there are poets who are not even published, but their work is really really compelling and powerful. So I think poetry from the if you take poetry out of the box of what is poetry, how poetry should be, which is also struggling from the queer aspect of it. If you take that out of it, I think all of us, every single queer person has a story to say. And if that is not your own unique experience, which is going to be expressed in your own way, which is your own queer story, if that is not poetry set in motion, which is your life, you living through your lived experiences, I don't know what is. So I think poetry is a very powerful tool, except that we all have this very preconceived idea that we are all made to mug it up right from schools and colleges where we think like, oh my god, I cannot write poetry, I cannot write like so and so. The whatever daffodils and what, I cannot write poetry like that. I cannot write poetry, I cannot read poetry, I cannot understand poetry because we've been told by our teachers or ourselves sorry.
Not me.
So we've been, instructed that conditioned that poetry is not for you. Poetry is for a level higher. It's for somebody else. It is not for you. You can consume it and just appreciate it. And that puts us in a very weird space where we think we don't understand poetry. Poetry is not for us, and we forget that we can actually write poetry. I say this from my personal experience because until I was like 25, 26, I used to write like random things, right? Because I come from a different generation, there was this thing called Orkut and MySpace where we have to actually put up statuses and stories and stuff. So I used to write these very short things. And one of my friend who's a published poet used to actually go through this and they said, oh my god, you can actually write poetry. Why do you think? In a very casual conversation, I was like, what are you calling poetry? So that is the kind of mentality we all come from. We think we cannot write, we think our story is not worth, our struggle is not as big as somebody else's. I don't have that kind of a compelling material with me. I don't know how to edit, I don't know how to write. All these things, if we take that away, if we not be normative for a while, if we allow ourselves, I think all of us can write poetry because poetry is quite simple. And I think that is what the contemporary modern poetry movement is all about. It is about breaking the stereotypes. You don't have to write it in novel, you don't have to write it in rhymes. It doesn't matter. There is a whole new genre called poetry, performance poetry. You can do open mics and stand-ups, and it doesn't even have to be poetry. You can write poetry which is funny and make it into a stand-up. There are plenty of people doing that. You can write dialogues, you can write short fiction, flash fiction. There is plenty of avenues for you to write. But are we taking it up? Is the real question. I think in that way, the world is democratizing a little bit, especially online and internet has democratized our claim, where people claim to writing and literary work. But I think we should also ask where we should consume more queer poetry. We should write, we should also write, but we should also consume more queer things. Because we don't know the struggles of the generation before that came before us. We don't have a history book of what happened in India. We have to go to Wikipedia to know where first pride was held or what was pride or if there is pride in Chennai or back. We have to go to an online forum. We don't know these stories. So where do we learn these stories? Where do we find our own, Bhupen Kakkars? We don't. Where do we find our own Ocean merchants and Joshua Mills? We don't know these people. We don't know these things. When are we going to learn this? Because this is our story. This is our elders. This is our quote-unquote parents. And this is the story we are going to, in Tamil, they say in local language, this is like, you are going to give it forward to your next generation. If I don't talk about Ocean merchant, how are you going to know about it? If I don't talk about my own word, how are you going to know about it? So I think we have to also, do our own bit of consuming as well as adding to the whole thing. And I think I switched on.
Yeah, Vikram said, and Vikram said, and I go out on a limb that I'm going to say that he's a better poet than a novelist. There are a lot of people who are going to say, oh, Superman Boy is an amazing book. But in secret, they were going to say, so there are those people. But I dare you to start reading Golden Gate and stop it. You can't. It's so beautiful. That's an entire novel, by the way. That's an entire novel written in a sonnet sequence. Yeah. So therefore, do give Vikram Seth's poetry a try. Again, a queer poet, hiding in plain sight.
So, this brings me to another question, especially because you mentioned like, how do we know, say, Indian queer poetry if we are not putting it across, right? So, and you also mentioned performance poetry, which is so. In this context, I wanted to ask, like, how do you see the role of regional languages in this? Because performance poetry events in Chennai, they do have English poetry, but they also have a lot of Tamil poetry. So, how do you how do you think that can play a role? Is what I wanted to ask.
Regional languages, regional literature, regional poetry has a very huge role to play, especially in performance poetry and open mics, which is what a lot of youngsters consume, which is their gateway into the the poetry. Because that is the other thing, no? It is called an open mic. It is not, called something else in Tamil. There is no other word for it. It itself, and like, so everybody assumes that, you have to write in English, you have to present in English. And you cannot just read it, you have to perform it. And that is a barrier. No? Already we are thinking that, oh my god, I cannot write. Is it good enough? Is it good enough as, very much work? Is it good enough as, so many so I have to overcome all of this, and then I have to, now I have to think in a different language entirely, put my thoughts and put my experience into a different language entirely. How am I going to do that as a writer? And I have to, so somebody presenting their work in English, I have to, come across all this. And then the regular audience who already has things that, I have no connection to culture, I have no connection to stories, or it's just big, this puts me to sleep. Or like, I don't understand the point of it. But a story or a words or a song or whatever it is, an experience narrated in their own language which they understand can actually target them because they can relate to it. It is their experiences also, because that is how we form our identities as well, especially in Tamil Nadu. It's a huge, being Tamil is an identity. You have to be Tamil, whether you speak Tamil or not. Being Tamil is an identity, and in multiple ways you actually express it by your your presentation of how you wear clothes and how you speak and what you read and who you read and what kind of politics you stand for. All of these things. So in that way, regional languages plays a huge role because there was no word. There was no word for it when I grew up. I thought gays was literally, a cool word for guys. I'm not kidding. In 2015, 16, I used to walk into class and I studied Kaudi. So, me trying to just show off and being cool, I used to say, "Hey gays," and I studied in a boys' school. Not kidding. And they did not know any better. They did not know any better because gay literally meant happy people. So, so, and there was no word. And then I, had come across it after 2 years or 3 years after that online, and I had to find. So there is a lot of these things. If there was a word for it, I would have known. I would, relate to it. I could latch on to it because for a lot of queer people, there's also the sideline conversation that, why do you need a label? Don't label yourself. But then all our lives we try to find a label for ourselves because we are trying to identify. We are trying to find out who I am all my life. So that label becomes a very important thing. And once yesterday when they were talking about the glossary, it is very important. It is a milestone because it takes these concepts to a lot of rural areas, to schools, to students, to people who don't even think about these things. And they are made to question themselves. Or they are aware that there is something like this exists at least. So how do I say, it's like, in a crowd of when you are being bullied and like everybody is throwing stone at you, one person who does not throw a stone, is still better than the others. It's like that. So that person becomes, they just, put their, stone down kind of thing because I'm aware this exists. I'm aware, these things are, they're out there. There are more people. And a lot of times these people who throw stones at you are scared of themselves, of questioning themselves. That is where the internalized homophobia and queerphobia comes in. So I think in a lot of sense we are very scared of these ideas of, it is a Western concept, it does not exist here, it does not. The queer art, why does it have to be a mainstream thing if Khajuraho is not mainstream, what is? Kamsutra is not mainstream, what is in India? Quote and unquote from Western world. So all of those things have queer representation. So if we make these things into regional access, if we have a regional access to these things, I think we will go a long way because we cannot just go deep, we have to go wide as well because we are losing a lot of our brothers and sisters and siblings aside. We do not think about our trans parents which we grew up watching. I grew up when I was sorry for taking up. There is this one small thing I always notice. Now, when you think about a trans woman, what do you think of? How do they look? How do they look? When I was growing up, they will wear t-shirts, they will clean shave their face, they will have what we call in Tamil the punk, which is that they just grow long hair and that's it. They will wear kumkum and whatnot. You will predominantly see them during the temple festivals and whatnot. They're very religious. They're not associated to anything sexual at all, but now everything is. And then there was this whole other period where all trans people were portrayed as sex workers. where does that leave me as a queer person? That pushed me to the edge of like, oh my god, I don't want to become that. That became a fear for me. And that alienated me from my own community. That alienated me from knowing about my own self. That stopped me from questioning myself. And now it has gone from that to this, hyper-feminized, imagery of, oh, better than women kind of image, which is the narrative the heteronormative society says, right? But what are the regional expressions of this? Yes, drag race is there, but do we have a regional representation? Yes, we have Telugu. We have almost, Telugu is a form everywhere. For all languages and regions across India, we have some folk art form where women were not allowed to perform, including cinema. So men don their roles. So if that is not drag, what is? And once there is also this whole dichotomy, right? Once you play the role, they won't really give you masculine roles after much, unless you are a Vatyar or you are a master. That becomes either you're put into a box or you are put above all the boxes. There is only two categories that exist. So all of these kind of regional access to it that brings all these ideas out. We think about all of these things, but we don't actually bring it to our regular life. So that way regional languages and regional access to all arts, not just literature, has a very important role.
Actually, had a similar question for you as well, which will be the last question from my side. So I wanted to ask you because you've recently translated the work of Krishna Vannam, who is a Bengali writer. So how do you kind of perceive the role of regional languages in, say, making art more accessible as regions? What have you got it out?
Yes, I think I'm not quite sure about what the Tamil situation is, but in Bengal we are very lucky to have at least two what we call little magazines. So these magazines don't have a very wide circulation. They have a circulation of a few thousand readers at most. But remember these two magazines, I'm actually going to name them. So one magazine is called Shikriti, which translates in English as recognition, and the other one is Shokonte, which translates in English as in our own voice. Shikriti primarily publishes gay, bisexual men's writing. Shokonte publishes primarily lesbian, bisexual women, trans men's writing. Now remember these two magazines, small little magazines, they've been running for definitely about 20 years or so, 25 years or so. So the reason why I'm mentioning these two little magazines is because a lot of so-called amateurish writers, they begin to cut their teeth there. So therefore, you first get published in these little magazines. And these little magazines play a very important role, as you may have gathered by now, in nurturing queer voices when mainstream big publishers are not going to touch them. So therefore, little magazines, I think, are a very, very healthy culture. Those of you who have a chance to, or if you want to, please go to the Kolkata Book Fair at least once in your life. It's a massive, massive thing. It's actually on right now. The reason why I'm mentioning the Kolkata Book Fair is because there's a vast area of the book fair that is only devoted to little magazines. Only devoted to little magazines. These are magazines that publish, very small amount of money. So they publish perhaps one issue per year. Yes, but very important because once you get published in those magazines, you have a certain amount of sense of self-worth. Oh my God, I can be published. Yeah, and I think so. Little magazines are a very important incubatory space from which queer writing can make it to the bigger world. And of course, you have your social media. Definitely, you can use social media. Akhil, who I personally know, he's a very dear friend. Akhil used to put up a lot of his poetry on Facebook, and now he's publishing these fantastic anthologies of his own poems. So therefore, social media, these are the two spaces where I think queer talent can be nurtured for future.
I just want to give a short reply for that because I find it is very funny and I wanted to talk to you about it. Can I?
Right.
No, so basically what happened was the Kannada cinema here and the language around the working class people and small markets and things like that. Where I used to go regularly and even now go for crisis intervention. Those were the spaces which taught me to queer spaces, queer words, queer, sentences, and then uh, also think of writing poetry because the images that are built in Kannada cinema is a very like every single image, idiom, metaphor, and everything is so heteronormative and the rest of the gang put together. So that you will not find even a word that falls anywhere out of it. So that immediately, if you can think differently from that kind of a structure, you start realizing you are queer. And that's where when you go into people, when you go into places where people live different kinds of life and where diversity is allowed, and there you find your language. Like for me, the Kothis, from the time that I started working with, from 1999 till date, they have given me my language. For me, Kothis, with all the slurs and queering the slurs and being able to build imaginations into slurs, and that kind of exploring actually gave me my queerness or like the sexualness to understand what is sexual, what is non-sexual, or how do we sexualize even things like but a simple thing. Like when I was trying to explain to somebody who is a lesbian, the person could only understand in their local context and local language, and they called me because I said I'm lesbian. They called me Gasa. The one who, and you know the word Gasa, and I really started using when somebody asked me, what is your sexuality? I would say Gasa. I think that people will understand immediately. More than saying it lesbian, queer, female, homosexual, etc. 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 So I think somewhere there is a space I think we need to also look into and engage and realize ourselves in those in such spaces and we'll definitely find lot more people. And now actually recently we are trying to form a queer poets collective here so that we can build a cultural capital in Bangalore and several of us are like trying to put together this group. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this has left quite a few interesting ideas that are very helpful in our personal reflections on queer art and how we can kind of take it forward in an Indian context. So I would now like to open to the audience for questions.
The first question is always the most difficult. Yes.
Thank you for the wonderful session. Nowadays, in the contemporary literature, there are a lot of works like particularly in retelling mythologies. There are a lot of works like about mythologies. Um, in that sense, I would like to ask: in what way does the Indian mythology embody queerness, and what does that reveals about the religious texts and discourse concerning gender and sexuality?
Brilliant question. Brilliant question. So yes, thank you. This is a this is a question that I'll be very happy to answer. So I teach a course in gender studies at a university, and one of the texts that I use is Same-Sex Love in India by Ruth Varikar and Identifies. So that automatically, every year when I teach that course, my students come up to me and say, "Sir, this is the Mahabharata nobody told us about. This is the Ramayana nobody told us about." And also, most of us know about Arpanarishwar, but very few people know about Arjuni, which is when Arjun transforms himself into a woman to basically make out with Krishna. Yeah. So that is, these are the things all there. So therefore, I think again, our mythologies are fantastically queer, but unfortunately, it has fallen into the wrong hands, patriarchal people. So I think it is our responsibility, it is our sacred duty to rescue our mythology from patriarchal, brahminical hands, and to explore the queerness that is already there. I think Devdutt Patnaik is doing a lot of work. I may not agree with his politics, but he's doing a lot of work to bring this forward. So I think mythology is something which is very, very important. And I think retellings is very important. And also regional variations of these epics. They very often contain queer elements which other regional variations won't. So I think we need to pay more attention to the regional variations of, say, Mahabharata and Ramayana, because we have a tendency to produce a simplified version of the epic, but it's a lot more complex than that. So yeah, brilliant question.
Thank you, sir.
I personally think that there is a revival of these retellings.
Absolutely.
I think in also a queer revival of these retellings, which is why I think a lot of these new age writing, which are queer in itself, is also coming, which is also very relevant to we find a lot of feminist point of view as well with retelling, which is also very important because otherwise, how will we know otherwise? And also the regional access of it, because there is Ramayana is different in South India and North India. It is a different story entirely.
Yes.
The heroes and villains were like totally different. So that is why it is important. And even figures like Meenakshi or even Ganesha, who are born different, who are born queer. How do we make them our own? How do we make them our gods and goddesses and queens? Is what I think. And I think that is why it is having a moment, and I think we should continue that as well. And not just with mythology, I think we should create more of our own stories and finding our own stories as well. Because enough about Rama and Rama, Shubhraka, enough please. We all know it is going to live through. We need new stories of Rupa Leela. We need to know who this person was. We need to know about all these parents, queer parents who have come before us, because that is going to be our story. That is going to be our decision. And I really, really hope somebody would wake up and start writing these things down. So that becomes part of when are we going to add myth to the mythology? The reverse way.
I think we'll just start rewriting, like you said, myth to mythology. I think we have to start looking and adding mythology or building our own mythology, because I mean, I'm further breaking it down, and I'm sure nobody will throw stones at me, because me as a female assigned person, I often face this from male assigned people's histories and mythologies that we actually don't exist anywhere. Even the small little things that are there, which are female assigned, identified, gets appropriated, and then for example, Shakti, not Shukri, sorry, who's that? Shikandi eventually becomes a Arvan or a Hijra. But if you go back and look at Shikandi, that is a woman who is transitioning to man, and which is seen as neither woman nor man by Bhishma, and that's why the whole thing. So he refuses to fight with this person. Now, if you look at it, there are certain issues when it comes to female assigned and male assigned. The whole problem of invisibilizing within the minority community becomes even more, or invisibilizing the silencing becomes even more difficult. So, in the recent days when I've started writing short stories, I sometimes build my own myths, and I make my own history sometimes. I'm thinking that I do that even in my paintings. Like if we do not build this, because myth is myth, so we can build myths. We are writing history. So I just wanted to say that.
Hi, this is a question to Rumi Harish. Um, I saw your painting like outside in the exhibition, especially one with a stereotypically male masculine body with a beard and expressing in a lot of stereotypically feminine way. It was such a beautiful painting. And I heard that you were carrying out your expression and you're thinking, like you said, you're thinking about beard a lot. And I'm wondering how you are navigating the music space, particularly because as a female assigned person now into transition, how you are being able to carry out that with respect to your, particularly with respect to your voice, how you are navigating the music space and especially classical space. And you need not answer if you don't want to. I don't want you to get into stressful memories. Yeah.
One thing that I was very seriously worried before transitioning was my voice. One of the reasons I delayed transitioning was also my voice. And then when some people and friends like did some kind of research and told me that it takes time, but there will be changes in your voice. After 1 or 2 years, I think I started dreaming about male voice like Jagjit Singh or like MD Ramanathan and assume that I start transitioning and I have this kind of voice. But the shit has hit me right now because my voice, so it was a journey. I literally saw the journey where uh, I hope I'm answering the question. Anyway, I literally saw the journey from my pitch, which I was comfortable in my previous body. I've been moving as a journey and reaching a space which is very unknown to. I mean, like even in a male body, which I desired, which I feel I am, I don't think I really like every part of the male body. There are certain spaces which I like about the male body, and there are certain very feminine expressions of male body that I really like. I and I think that is what I'm now stuck here with my voice because one is the voice is also very confused. It is journeying in unknown parts. The voice also doesn't know to find its sa or ma or its own home. So there is no sense of belonging. I am now trying to build that sense of belonging for my voice, for my painting, for my poetry, which I do unapologetically. And if I can't sing a certain thing, I will say I will not sing, I will not sing because of my transition without feeling guilty about it. So, in terms of like, for example, so when I'm singing in such a hazy, unclear voice, but if it was earlier, I would have felt like I would have sat and cried for 3 days, but now I'm saying no, but this is my voice and that. I mean, I don't care. So for me, what the transition has done is there is no good or no bad. There is just singing or no singing, or painting or no painting. So there is no good painting, there is no bad painting. I hope that within 6 months I will be. My only problem is that I've lost a little flexibility, which I want to regain in the next 6 months of practice. So I'm hoping I will do it. And if I don't, I'll find a new way of singing.
That's great. Thank you for answering and sending you power and love in your way. Thank you. And if no one is gonna question, I have another question also. But if someone else wants this mic, I can pass around. I wanted to like I don't believe in this thing like so-called rhyming words, so-called pulling in oxymorons and metaphors and writing a poetry. And for any art medium, I think expression is what the art is. And I understand that for having to people, inviting people to come and read their poetries is a bit of um, people need to have that will kind of thing. But as a like local art group or a small art collective, if we need to bring in people or invite new writers or the amateur writers, come on, come talk it out or write it out or show what you have written, because we don't talk. Most of the time as queer people we write, we express only through art forms, and that needs to be heard among people. So what can be done in some small local groups to invite people who have not taken up writing at all, to so-called beginners, amateurs, to come express, release things that have not been expressed kind of thing? How can I make people do that or invite more people in?
How to bring people together.
Yeah.
So, no, that does not mean that I own the microphone.
No.
No. So again, I think
Starting small is always a good idea. Starting small is always a good idea. So many of us may not be able to afford publishing a little magazine, but you can definitely create an e-magazine. And I know that there are people who are actually putting up small magazines that are digital. So there is one particular magazine that I would want to mention that they constantly try to publish offbeat stuff. It's called Cafe de Census, and this is primarily an e-magazine. And I think, and just because it's an e-magazine does not mean that they publish poor quality material. No, they don't. They have a very strict editorial policy. So I think establishing an e-magazine would be a very interesting way, a cheap way of building up a sense of an artistic community where people who are normally reticent, people who are normally withdrawn, they can find a comfortable, safe space, which is what you want, is for them to find a comfortable, safe space where they can express themselves. E-magazine is absolutely the way forward. Also, Facebook groups, I think, are a very good idea, because Facebook groups also, if it is a closed group, that guarantees that there won't be trolling, that guarantees that there won't be harassment, and you could have very strict policies that people who are getting into that harassing mode, they can be blocked. I have been running, as was said in the introduction, I have been running this page, which I would warmly recommend you all to join because I'm greedy. It's a small group, it's only about 15,000 members. So it's a tiny, tiny group, as you can imagine. It's called New Gender Studies. And initially, I have the policy of not blocking anyone, of allowing everybody to comment and post whatever they want. And that worked fine for a few years. Remember, I started this in 2010. And for a few years, it worked fine. But unfortunately, there were some trolls who were becoming a little difficult to take. So I had to reverse my policy and some people have to be blocked. So because it's an online community, you simply don't know who is going to sneak in and start harassing people. So I think it's a good idea to have some kind of a stringent policy where the trolls can be blocked. But again, a space should be created where this can happen. Physical meeting in a space, after COVID is suddenly not beginning to look like such a good idea after all, because we've become so used to sitting in our bedrooms that many of us have begun to grow roots into our bedrooms. So for us, we got to cut our roots off the bedrooms and push ourselves into the drawing room. If that is not possible, cyberspace is there. And also, by the way, WhatsApp groups. That's also a very good way of fostering a sense of community. So use technology. We are technology. Yeah, that's the thing to do.
I think it can be done in two ways, and it should be done in two ways. One is that all this, you have to come together to write and to share your work. For example, writing is a very solitary practice, right? Regardless, we could be like 50 writers and we could still not talk to each other and we can just write our own stuff. That is how writing usually works. So we should do that, where you actually bring people, because there is a lot of times and a lot of people who go through things where I cannot write. I cannot write because I don't have that push, whatever you call it, writer's block, whatever you call it. And when you sit with another person, who's also in the room, doing their own thing, you are forced to do your own thing. So you start thinking about your own things. And also that is a place where you can bounce off ideas and brainstorm something. Okay, let's write about purple chairs. let's write about, white lies. And that would push you creatively also, for you to have something to go. And those kind of things have to happen as like an initial layer where there is no, chance or, I mean, if you are going to write, you are going to, write. If you want to share after, let's say, 2 hours of writing, and you want to share your writing at the end of it, please do. You don't even have to read it out loud. We'll just pass it around and we'll read. Then we can share our comments or whatever it is if you are open for comments. And then there has to be another layer of, sort of these editors and sub-editors, people who are already published, not just amateurs, but who knows their craft. Because writing is not good enough. I mean, you have to come out of your bed, you have to get out of your bed, but then are you still going to be within your own house? Are you going to be still within your comfort zone? You have to be pushed out. If your writing is not great, you have to be told it is not great. And you are supposed to be told how to make it great. Even punctuation, grammar, or whatever it is. I'm not talking about the meter and the forms of writing, but there are ways you can actually make it proper, and you have to. That is how, because writing, especially poetry or our own stories for queer people, it is not just about us. You writing your stuff, I'm writing my stuff, is not just about us. Whether it is published or not, I am telling my story. It is my expression. And somebody else is going to consume it, and they are going to know that this expression existed, this person existed. And that gives them life, that gives them confidence in their own existence, in their own life, because that is what we all come across, right?
It's also about craft.
Yeah. And how do we, especially that is the difference between prose and poetry, right? You have to condense it in poetry. If nobody teaches you, how are you going to learn? Or if you are writing poetry in one way and I'm writing in another way, how are we going to, learn each other's thing? Because if I don't know what you're talking about and how you are talking about it, I cannot really consume it. If I don't understand your point of view, I will not be able to, consume it 100%. I will not be able to experience it. I will read through it, but I will not be able to, retain it back. I will not. Your craft is lost for me, even as a peer writer or peer consumer of that writing. So I think in that way we also need somebody else, like a layer of people who also nourishes this. So we can have a lot of younger, newer, smaller magazines who have access to other things as well, who can actually think out like, okay, this is a good writer, this is a good piece of writing. I'm actually going to take this forward and push you out. So you go out, you do your own thing, and that becomes an inspiration for everybody else as well. Oh my God, somebody actually takes notice. It is not just 10 people gathering and then writing quote and unquote crap every time.
Yeah.
And we don't even know, because a lot of times we think whatever we write is crap.
Amazing.
No, it's either that. Oh my God, I wish I could say that. No.
A lot of people do.
Yes. A lot of times I feel like whatever I write is crap. And I know it is crap. I just want somebody to tell me how to make it better. Because this is my 100%, or so I believe. I want to make it better. I want to go to the next level. How am I going to go? So that conversations doesn't exist. So those, I think in those two layers, I think we can, bring out these things. And I think it is also for any other art form as well. There is a lot of places for writers to write in seclusion. That has become a COVID online thing now. You can actually join a lot of groups. You can actually everybody is just like, mic or video off and they just write that. But they just write and then they share once a week. So these things have to also happen in person, because again, I want you to consume it, but I don't want your comments. Also, those kind of people exist. Or I want your comments, not your criticism. Because all of us are different, all of us are very sensitive, especially when it comes to something we create, because it's our baby. And we don't want, also it becomes very essential. If somebody says it is just shit, I cannot write again, or I will not show it to that person again. I cannot show it to that person again. So that becomes a shut off thing. So I think in that way we can work in like both layers. You have to bring everybody together, but also somebody else should actually take over at some point. Push it out, push people out. Because if you keep getting people in, it is just going to be crowd and noise, nothing else. Yeah.
In fact, I really had to I completely don't agree with your point because it comes from a certain um, experience with the academics. Coming from the community point of view, like for a person like me who has managed to kind of do like a certain amount of education and then like jumping into ground level work for crisis intervention, practicing around police stations, things like that. Whenever I have to express my experience or talk or about my experience, what me and another friend with whom I work also, we have often faced is that we need to subscribe to a certain language. Only then we will be communicating to people. Now, I mean, if we're quick enough, we can subscribe to the language and it's easy, but then there are certain experiences, expressions, and there are certain, sense of belonging which cannot be expressed or even, or we might not have the language in the existing kind of structures for us to subscribe to that structure and explain. We probably might be much better in doing it in a, say, in a different language of our own, or we might be building a new language, or we might be building a language which communicates to people who are ready to shed these hang-ups. I don't know how to put it, but I'm thinking that one of the main criticisms that has been held, especially against non-academic people like Rumi and a few others, or something like Livingston Vidya, or many other, I don't want to express it in my way. The main things either comes in the form of the language, the grammar, punctuation, and then it also comes in the form of aesthetics. Like for example, when we formed a group called Lisbon in 2005, and it was a migratory group where people from all over South India and two other states of North India, we were together, and this was mainly people who were rescued from crisis and they were staying there, doing the short stay, and then we picked up theatre because we felt that was the only way that we could avoid heights internal. We said if we focus ourselves, these were all the first timers and mostly 10th fail, 12th fail kind of people who started exploring their skills in writing, their skills in poems, their skills in singing, dance, etc. And we formed a theatre group. And that theatre group, we until trained theatre person came in 2007 or 8, until then we did our own theatre. And of course, we got all the kind of criticisms on aesthetics, and we were also, but our creativity really worked, put it together where everybody were thinking about how to write a script together, how to write a poem together, how to write a song together, how do we construct a scene, how was the blocking done, who will stand where and how will they talk. So, and especially because we came from a multilingual background, so we could not converse with each other even in one language. Like Kannada was not the language that I would speak to somebody who is from Tamil Nadu, or a Tamil Nadu person could not speak Tamil to Malay. So what we did in our play is that if a father is a Tamil person, his son would be Malayali, and the conversation would be same. Like there will be Tamil, Malayalam, and there will be all these languages because it is our language. So I think we started finding new paths and it was really working when our group broke very badly and we got, I mean, it's a very sad experience, but then, yeah, we were doing something really interesting in terms of telling our stories together. So I mean, right now, like post 2010 and now, I I still think that while I do think that we need the training that you're saying that some person should come and train us in university. I also want to see that trainer can help us build our own business, our own language, our own jargons, our own grammar.
which should be understood by the mainstream, supposed to be mainstream society. Why doesn't it, why doesn't it reach to the people? I mean, I'm probably saying bullshit now, but I think years down the line, we may be able to understand this. Thank you.
We will be taking one last question now.
So just one point before we get the next question. Yes, I think the point is very well made. The mainstream has to be more generous. I think that is where we would all agree. Is that there are going to be new languages, there will be new modes of representation. If the mainstream becomes conservative, that's where the problem is. So mainstream has to be more generous. And if you're not generous, I'm sorry, but beyond the point there won't be any art. So it is the generosity that is the key word. But yeah, sorry.
First of all, thanks for this. Thanks for this.
No, it's not working.
First of all, thanks for this wonderful session. I actually had two questions. The first question has been asked by her. The relevance of myth in understanding queer in present tense, and that has been answered wonderfully by this. My question now is that when we talk about aesthetics, we predominantly talk from the perspective of a female body and the representation of a female body in sculpture, in paint, in architecture, and that too is promoted by the heteronormative mainstream media. So my question is that is it time to think a masculine body as beauty, not just a heroic body? Like in myths also, a male body like the bodies of Duryodhana, Krishna, Arjuna are vividly represented. But those are perceived as like heroic. But the bodies of Satyavati, the body of Draupadi, all are perceived from the perspective of beauty. So is it time to think a masculine body or to look at a masculine body from the perspective of aesthetics and beauty?
Yeah.
Can I?
Sorry. Let me just take 7 hours to answer your question. But I'll keep it to 7 minutes. No, less than that. So the thing is, if you actually look at the history of art, you are going to find that if you look at Greek sculpture, for example, right? So absolutely full of beautiful male figures. But there was a difference there because even the male figure there was regarded as an embodiment of courage, of discipline, of order. It was never sexualized. So therefore, I think the sexualized Tom of Finland has been referred to, which I'm very happy about. So I think the sexualization of the male body, the eroticization of the male body, actually does not begin to happen until the advent of gay imagery. And that is beginning to happen sometime around late 19th century. So I would definitely want you to look at the photography of some people like Wilhelm von Greuden, who was a German photographer. I would want you to look at the painting of someone like Simeon Solomon, who was a British painter. So this is all happening in the 19th century. But it really takes off after the queer rights movement. So from 1940s onwards, you've got some photographers like George Platt Lyons. I'm just giving out these names, but I can, you can meet me later and you'll get the spelling. George Platt Lyons. Yeah, he's taking pictures of male bodies, eroticized, aestheticized. But from the 1960s onwards, something very strange begins to happen. You have got the advent of something called the physique pictorial. I love physique pictorials because these magazines, they were ostensibly about bodybuilding. Bodybuilders were not buying those magazines. Gay men were. because it was all about, oh, we are promoting physical health, look, but it was all men in tiny posing pouches. None of the bodybuilders were buying it, the gay men were buying it. So therefore, the physique pictorial begins to sexualize and eroticize the male body, but does it very surreptitiously, like, oh no, this is all about gymming. Yes, but it isn't about gymming. But later on, of course, when I talk about, so I also teach masculinity studies at my university, and I say that, the way in which I think about Indian masculinity is that I've got two periodize because, I'm scientific that way. So I periodize. I talk about two periods in Indian imagery, which is before John Abraham, after John Abraham. Because I think that the movie that is like the watershed over here is watershed. Remember water, emphasis on water, which is when John Abraham is coming out of the sea wearing the swimming trunks, those there you go. Yeah, you all have dirty minds like I do. Thank you. So that is where there is a radical change that happens. John Abraham's body is the first time that a male body is held up for an erotic appreciation. And now we are going with the flow, but I think it's really much, so it's happening. But I think the media and the artistic community needs to know that human bodies can be sexualized, can be eroticized. It does not always have to have two large breasts.
I totally agree with you, yes. But I don't agree with the genre. I think it started with Made in India.
Meaning so much.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
To this day. In the context of mythology, we all, I don't know how old you are, or if you've seen the DD version of Mahabharata or Ramayana, and whatever you consume it now in Star Plus and whatnot, you can see the drastic change of, how Duryodhan is, like, this proper Salman Khan, man's chest and body. That was not the strength. The strength was not, in having muscles back then. It was about being huge, eating a lot, so just throwing a man across. It was that. From that to, I think, even mythology has been, or the telling of mythology has been aesthetized by the normative society, and they are trying to break it a little bit by making all these like male figures more glamorous and whatnot. And again, most often, I don't know, maybe because I am a gay man who does this, or maybe you are not, which is that you go to Twitter after, all these series which is being come out, even Tamil regular, Sun TV Wala series. There is a huge following for all the actors. Oh my god, he's so cute, oh my god, he did his shirt, oh my god, he did this, oh my god, you look at the way he looked at his wife. I'm like really surprised because this is as crazy as fans can get on, about Vijay or Akshay or Raj. I've actually seen this craze, right? I mean, even among people I fraternize with. It's that we are more open to not just being one hero figure. It's like, that guy is good, that movie is okay. And it's like this Netflix meme, I love this storyline, and the storyline being another apartment. It's like that. So even we started paying attention to the sideline of these things. I think that is also, given rise to like the fame of Harry Styles and who not, who claim to be open. I hope he really is, unlike the Indian superstar who just paint their names and call themselves non-binary. So that poses the real question of what it is to be in the public eye, to be publicly consumed, even imagery-wise, and what you actually stand for. For example, like I said, the superstar who painted nails and came on the cover of GQ and issue about non-binary. That is not non-binary. That is not non-binary. And there was like this huge rage across social media and nobody took it seriously. Zero. So the real question is, what are we queer people allowed to say and stand up for? If I agree that, oh my god, Super Relax is such a nice film and oh my god, that was such a queer, nice representation. No, it is not. If I say that, yes, I will be, taken into the, room. I'll be, given a mic, given a platform to speak about. But if I actually talk about, the villainization of pansexual in the same movie, which you don't even think exists, or there are certain parts even trans people have issues with the representation of that. That becomes the real question, where like immediately the mic doesn't work or whatever it is, the comments are deleted, things like that. So the real question is not about just being aesthetizing this whole thing or to democratize male bodies. It has been. Males can always show their nipples on Instagram. I mean, we all know that thing exists, until at least a month ago. I mean, now everybody can show off their nipples on Instagram, or so Meta says. So, but if you take that aside, who is allowed to question these structures? And what are the questions actually being taken in? And how it is being processed is the real, gauge. That is the real story. That is the real gauge of, how social media actually exists, how social media and the general public actually exists. And what happens in social media is not the real thing. What happens in magazines and whatever goes on in novels is not the real story. It is just one in thousands among thousands among thousands. One story gets published. One person gets celebrated. One person's story becomes a movie. When Rumi was talking about the Kannada industry, Living Smile Vidya's life story was made into a Kannada movie, and the very interesting fact is that even Living Smile Vidya herself would disagree with portrayal. And who is she even asked about it? Is she even allowed to say it out loud? That is because you're talking against a superstar who has won a national award. So it is her story. It is her story portrayed. You won a national award. So these are the kind of things, right? And like I said, how a trans person should be portrayed, how a masculine person should be portrayed, how a gay person should be portrayed. You should actually wear a rainbow flag and jump from the terrace and wear one nose pin. That is when I can be gay. If not, I'm not. I'm not. I mean, it works for Bollywood. It works for the general, everybody is like, against me. I'm just going to stand up and yell and shout. Yes, that moment. But it doesn't speak for everybody. That is what how we actually are. Not a lot of us even own a rainbow flag in this country. That is the kind of, aesthetics. When you talk about that was a very interesting conversation. I think we should have expanded more on aesthetics. How queer art is supposed to be presented. Like I said, you are allowed to be queer, but you are not allowed to present your queer self. Or you being modest, or you being traditional. What is the tradition? We don't know. We're sari, we're dhoti, we're this, we're sanskari, who speak sanskari, we say namaskar, namaste, fallen people's feet, and that is not, do not question the establishment. Do not raise your voice. I think the aesthetics bring in, it's like, Tamil, there is a saying, it's like, you will see the elephant later, but you will hear the rings of bell first. It's like that. So aesthetics is that for the mainstream. They police us, they moral police, they tone police, they, visually aesthetic police queer art in the way that, like he said, you don't see penises. If the galleries would actually say, oh our kind of audience is not comfortable with it. If they're comfortable with, boobs, why are they comfortable with penises? I mean, what is this body image issues they all having, or you even talking about the body image issues if they are having. So these are the kind of, the aesthetics is what they throw at us, even among, whoever is trying to face this whole thing. They throw aesthetics at you and say that you are not enough. Yeah, you are an artist, yeah, you have a good story, but this is not aesthetic enough. This is not good enough. Why don't you try something else? Why don't you do something else? And I think that is where the real thing comes in as well. Where also this obsession with Bollywood and general Bollywood obsession with bodybuilding and how a body should be. Even now, we don't see Salman Khan or Shah Rukh Khan. We don't allow them to have body hair, including in Pathan. If you know he's a man, who knows if he even has body hair anymore. That is how much we police a cis heterosexual male superstar's body. That is how much we police. So how are you going to allow a heroine, having unwaxed upper lip? are we even talking about body hair? Sense of, are we even, so this poses a much larger question of, are we even allowing people to be themselves? Is the real question. And every time you get into that boundary, they'll say, aesthetics, stay away. Or like they won't even, that is the glass ceiling we are trying to get. But I think in a lot of, for a lot of cis hetero people, it doesn't really, come out as apparent. But there's a lot of queer people who consume a lot of smaller stuff. We have our own smaller pockets of joy, like, looking at somebody who's dancing behind like 7 rows of people. Oh my God, he's so cute. We do that even now, even among our own friends, whether that person knows or not, whether they are being idealized or sexualized or objectified. But it does happen, but I think nowadays it is becoming more prominent with people like Ranveer Singh who are trying to live their authentic self, whatever that even means. But they are allowed to do so, only Ranveer Singh is allowed to do that. But is somebody else allowed to do that? Is somebody else would, even have the courage to do that? That is the whole, conversation we should be having about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add this point. I think you covered it quite interestingly, but I just wanted to say they are too trained to think in binaries. So when it is aesthetics, you think of either feminine, and then because you have to get out, then you start thinking about masculine. Now, I, I, while I was doing my transition in my body, I mean, I have an obese body, I mean, according to the mainstream again, it's not a very beautiful body, whatever, I don't care. When I was thinking about my body, I had some images like this long beard, which would be like, that I could walk with me, and then a very saggy stomach that would walk with me, and then a very beautiful hips. So then I suddenly realized that beyond these aesthetics of understanding masculine or feminine, I think when we shift into thinking of our fascinations, our what makes us more uh, again, go back to this whole point of thing saying that the space that gives you the sense of belonging will make you think more. And so is the aesthetics also, because aesthetics can make you feel extremely, horrible. I completely go by what you have said, and I just wanted to add this, saying that anything can become very beautiful only the other eyes to see. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, we come to the close of this panel. Thank you so much to all the wonderful panelists for bringing so many amazing insights and especially giving personal narratives. And thank you for the audience for being patient to listen us for almost 2 hours. So, thank you so much.
The question is how is Hindi going to create business? That's the shit.